Ladies and gentlemen, let me hit you with the truth right out the gate. When a woman doesn't hear from you anymore, she doesn't sit around waiting by the phone, staring at the ceiling, and whispering your name like some tragic character in a soap opera. No, she shifts gears, she flips the script. She reclaims her power. See, here's the hook: silence is a language. And when you go silent on a woman, she's forced to translate it. And trust me, her translation won't always work in your favor. At first, she'll notice. She'll double check. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's caught up. She'll give you the benefit of the doubt because women are nurturers by nature. We extend grace before we slam doors. But when that silence stretches, when days turn to weeks, that's when she changes. A woman will start doing this. She'll redirect her energy. The calls she used to take from you, she now takes them from herself, checking in, affirming herself, remembering that she was whole before you ever walked into the picture. The time she spent waiting for your text, she'll pour it into her goals, her craft, her glow up. And here's the kicker: the quieter you become, the louder she becomes in her own life. Don't get it twisted. Yes, she may feel hurt. Yes, she may replay the memories. But here's the strength of a woman: she knows how to rise from absence. She knows how to turn your silence into her anthem. She won't just get over you, she'll outgrow you. So if you think ghosting a woman is control, understand this: what you're really doing is handing her the key to freedom. Because a woman, when you stop contacting her, doesn't crumble. She recalibrates, she evolves, she reclaims her throne, and by the time you finally look back, wondering where she went, you'll see her, standing taller, shining brighter, surrounded by everything and everyone that speaks to her worth. Silence speaks volumes, and nowhere is that truer than in the dynamic between a man and a woman. When communication suddenly stops, people often underestimate silence, thinking it is nothingness, a void, or an absence. But silence is not empty, it is loaded with meaning, interpretation, and energy. When you stop contacting a woman, you may believe you are simply withdrawing, perhaps to make her miss you, or maybe because you are distracted, uninterested, or confused about what you want. Regardless of your reason, silence doesn't sit there quietly. It shouts. It demands to be understood. It tells her something about you, about the relationship, and about herself. At first, she may not want to believe it. Women are natural communicators, nurturers, and bridge builders. When you go quiet, her first instinct is not to assume the worst, but to interpret your silence as circumstantial. She may rationalize it: you're busy with work, your phone died, you've been under pressure. She tries to make sense of it because she has been conditioned to offer grace, to give room, to wait for explanations. But with every passing hour, every unanswered message, every night where she stares at her phone waiting for a buzz that never comes, silence begins to change its meaning. That silence is no longer neutral. It starts to sound like rejection. It starts to feel like disinterest. A woman who was once sure of where she stood with you now feels her footing slip, and she has to translate your lack of words into a story she can live with. And here's the thing: when words are missing, the mind fills in the gaps. She will replay conversations, reread old texts, and search for clues that explain why you have disappeared. Your silence becomes a canvas on which she paints her own conclusions. And usually, those conclusions are heavier, more painful, and more permanent than you intended. Silence speaks another message too. It says, you are not a priority. A woman doesn't need constant communication to feel valued, but she does need consistency. When she experiences an abrupt absence of contact, it feels like an abrupt absence of care. Even if you think your silence is a temporary strategy, maybe to create mystery, maybe to test her, it rarely has that effect. Instead of making her chase, it often makes her withdraw. It makes her realize she is giving her energy to someone who cannot or will not reciprocate. What many men fail to realize is that silence does not just impact the present moment, it shifts how she sees the entire connection. It reframes the story. That good morning text you used to send feels less sweet when it has been replaced with days of nothing. That compliment you once gave fades against the backdrop of your disappearance. Silence rewrites history because it colors everything with the tone of indifference. But silence is not just about loss, it is also about clarity. When you stop contacting her, she learns more about herself than she does about you. She recognizes her thresholds, how much waiting she is willing to endure, how much effort she is willing to extend without reciprocation, and where she draws the line. Your silence teaches her that her time, her emotions and her energy are valuable. And eventually, she may decide that she doesn't want to spend them on someone who cannot even send a message. So yes, silence speaks volumes. It tells her you are uncertain, unavailable, or unwilling. It tells her to redirect her focus and protect her peace. You may think you are doing nothing when you stop contacting a woman, but in reality, you are doing the loudest thing of all, showing her exactly where she stands, and perhaps more importantly, reminding her that she deserves more than silence. Initial grace is one of the most beautiful yet misunderstood responses a woman gives when she realizes that contact has stopped. When communication begins to fade, her first reaction is rarely anger, bitterness, or cutting you off. Instead, she offers space, she extends patience, and she gives you the benefit of the doubt. This is because women, by nature, are wired to nurture and to believe in the possibility of goodness before they assume the worst. She doesn't rush to judge. She doesn't immediately conclude that you have lost interest. Instead, she tries to rationalize your absence in a way that still protects the bond she thought existed. In those first moments, when the silence is fresh, she tells herself a story that shields her from the sting of rejection. She thinks, maybe he's busy. Maybe he's under pressure. Maybe he just needs a little time to himself. She might even feel empathy for you, assuming that life has weighed you down. This initial grace is not weakness, it's strength. It is her showing that she values connection enough to allow room for human imperfection. Rather than demanding constant attention, she demonstrates understanding, because in her world, love and care always leave space for flaws. What makes this stage so powerful is that it shows just how deeply women are willing to invest in relationships. They don't withdraw at the first sign of trouble, they lean in, they try to bridge the gap, they wait to see if what they had was real enough to withstand a pause. But this grace has an invisible clock ticking. While she is willing to wait, she is also watching. With each passing day of silence, her patience shifts from hope into doubt. The same grace that made her say, "He'll come around," slowly transforms into, "Maybe he doesn't care." And that is where many people misunderstand women. They confuse her patience with naivety, assuming that she will always wait, always forgive, always hold on. But her grace is not endless. It is conditional on seeing effort, on witnessing some sign that she still matters. The moment she realizes that her grace is being taken for granted, she begins to pull it back. Her kindness becomes clarity, and her waiting turns into walking away. What you must understand is that initial grace is not given lightly. It comes from a place of loyalty, hope, and respect. She is not trying to make excuses for you. She is simply giving you a chance to prove that her trust in you is not misplaced. When you fail to respond to that grace, you aren't just ignoring her patience, you are dismissing one of the most valuable gifts she could offer, the gift of time, understanding, and suspended judgment. The tragedy is that many men assume silence is harmless because she hasn't reacted yet. They believe her patience means indifference or tolerance. In reality, her patience is the calm before the storm of her decision. She may not confront you, she may not demand answers, but internally, she is shifting from a state of waiting for you to show up to preparing herself to move on without you. Initial grace is her way of honoring the connection one last time before deciding if it's worth preserving. If you use that window of patience wisely, you can rebuild trust and show consistency. If you waste it, you will likely lose her forever, because once her grace expires, her heart no longer makes room for you. And when a woman closes that door, she rarely reopens it. So, while it may look like nothing is happening, when she quietly waits, everything is happening. She is observing, she is evaluating, she is deciding. Her initial grace is not an invitation to disappear further, it is a test of whether you are worthy of the trust she instinctively extended. And when that grace runs out, she will not plead or chase, she will simply take her strength back and let the silence you created become permanent. When contact stops and silence replaces connection, a woman eventually reaches a turning point where she begins to redirect her energy. At first, the lack of communication may sting. It may leave her feeling confused or uncertain, wondering what went wrong or why the silence appeared in the first place. But what sets her apart is her ability to take that very energy she once invested in you, the calls, the texts, the emotional availability, the thoughtfulness, and reroute it back into herself and her world. This redirection is not immediate, it's a process. Yet once it begins, it becomes unstoppable. The hours she once spent waiting for a message, checking her notifications, or planning conversations with you now start to shift into something more productive. That silence that once felt heavy slowly becomes space she can fill with things that enrich her life. She may dive deeper into her work, refocus on her studies, or pour her creativity into projects she had previously put aside. What once went into sustaining the relationship now fuels her personal growth, and the transformation is undeniable. Energy is powerful because it cannot remain stagnant, it must go somewhere. When she realizes that giving it to you brings no return, she naturally finds new outlets. She may pick up a new hobby, re-engage with friends she had less time for, or throw herself into fitness and health. She begins to glow differently, not because she is trying to prove anything to you, but because she is reclaiming parts of herself that were overshadowed by her emotional investment in someone who withdrew. The beauty of this redirection lies in how it shifts her perspective. In the beginning, silence might feel like rejection, but as she invests her time and energy elsewhere, rejection transforms into redirection. She realizes that your absence has gifted her the space to focus on herself. It's in this phase that she remembers her strength, her independence, and her ability to stand fully on her own. She starts to see her worth not in how much attention she receives from someone else, but in how fully she shows up for herself. This process often surprises the very person who went silent. When they return or decide to reach out again, they find a woman who is no longer in the same place they left her. She's not waiting, she's not longing, and she's not desperate for explanations. She has shifted, she has grown, and she has redirected her energy into building a life so full that she no longer feels the void that silence once created. It's important to understand that this redirection isn't about spite or revenge. She is not pouring into herself just to make you jealous or to prove you wrong. Instead, it's an act of self-preservation and self-love. It is her way of ensuring that your silence doesn't break her spirit, but instead becomes the catalyst for her transformation. She knows that her time and energy are too precious to waste on waiting for someone who cannot show consistency. What begins as a painful adjustment turns into empowerment. That moment she no longer checks her phone every 5 minutes. That day she wakes up excited about her own plans instead of yours. That smile she wears without thinking of who isn't calling. Those are signs that her redirection is complete. She is reclaiming herself piece by piece, until she realizes that she is whole again. In the end, your silence may feel like an ending, but for her, it becomes the beginning of something greater. By redirecting her energy, she doesn't just move on, she levels up. She takes what was once invested in you and plants it into herself, and the result is a woman who rises stronger, more focused, and more fulfilled than before. The very energy that was once wrapped around you now builds her into the version of herself she was always meant to be. Transformation through absence is one of the most remarkable shifts that happen when contact stops. At first, absence feels like loss. The sudden silence can stir up confusion, disappointment, and even grief. A woman may wrestle with questions, replay old conversations in her mind, and wonder if she did something wrong. The initial reaction is often emotional, because absence highlights what is missing. But over time, what begins as pain starts to take shape as power. Absence, though uninvited, becomes the very condition that forces her to transform. When you stop contacting her, you may think you're creating distance, but what you're really creating is space. And in that space, something profound happens. She begins to grow. Without the constant pull of waiting for your message or interpreting your silence, she starts redirecting that attention inward. She learns to sit with herself, to hear her own voice louder than the echoes of yours, and to understand what she truly needs. What looked like abandonment at first slowly shifts into a doorway for her independence. This transformation is not immediate, it unfolds in stages. At first, she may resist it, clinging to the hope that things will go back to how they were. She may check her phone too often, or hold on to memories a little longer than she should. But as absence stretches on, she learns something valuable. She can survive without the connection she once thought she needed. That realization alone is powerful. It shows her resilience, her ability to endure disappointment, and her capacity to stand on her own 2 feet. With every passing day, absence teaches her to choose herself. The silence that once hurt begins to sound like freedom. Freedom from uncertainty, freedom from waiting, freedom from investing in someone who isn't investing back. She begins to embrace activities, people, and opportunities that bring her joy. She may discover passions she had forgotten about or goals she had placed on hold. In the process, she starts to transform not just emotionally, but mentally and even spiritually. She becomes more grounded, more focused, and more confident in who she is without external validation. What makes this transformation so striking is the shift in her identity. Absence doesn't just help her heal, it reshapes her. She goes from being someone who once relied on your presence to someone who no longer defines herself by it. She may change her routines, her environment, or even the way she presents herself to the world. These changes are not about erasing you, but about rediscovering her. Absence clears away the noise and forces her to see herself fully, perhaps for the first time in a long time. Eventually, this transformation through absence creates an unshakable strength. When she realizes she no longer needs the call, the text, or the attention to feel whole, she becomes untouchable in a way she wasn't before. That strength makes her more selective with her time and energy. It gives her the clarity to recognize who deserves her presence and who doesn't. The irony is that absence, something often used as a tool to control or diminish, ends up doing the exact opposite. Instead of leaving her broken, it builds her. Instead of silencing her, it amplifies her. Instead of making her smaller, it makes her bigger in her own life. By the time you notice, she is no longer the same woman you knew. She has evolved into someone stronger, more radiant, and more self-assured. Transformation through absence is a quiet but undeniable rebirth. It proves that what feels like loss can actually be liberation. She doesn't just recover from the silence. She uses it as fuel to become the woman she was always meant to be, whole, powerful, and no longer waiting on anyone to complete her. Outgrowing, not just moving on, is one of the deepest truths about what happens when a woman faces silence in place of communication. Moving on is often seen as a simple act of letting go, closing one chapter and turning the page to another. But outgrowing goes further. It's not just about leaving something behind, it's about evolving beyond it. When contact stops and she finds herself confronted with absence, a woman doesn't simply detach. She grows into a new version of herself, one that can no longer fit into the same space where she once waited, hoped, or compromised. At first, she may experience the normal waves of hurt and confusion. She may wonder why the contact ended, why silence replaced consistency, why presence turned into absence. These thoughts can linger for a while, but over time, they no longer consume her. The very questions that once kept her restless start to feel less important because her perspective begins to expand. She sees that waiting for someone who isn't choosing her is not where her story ends. The silence that once wounded her becomes a mirror that shows her how much she has outgrown the need for it. Outgrowing means she doesn't just detach emotionally. She evolves to the point where what she once accepted no longer appeals to her. She begins to recognize her own worth with more clarity, and this awareness changes the standards she holds for herself and others. The silence forces her to reflect, and in that reflection, she sees how much energy she poured into a situation that didn't honor her fully. That realization doesn't just encourage her to move forward, it propels her upward. As she grows, her priorities shift. The text that once could have made her entire day now feels small compared to the joy she builds in her own world. The calls she waited for pale in comparison to the goals she's chasing and the dreams she's building. Outgrowing is about realignment. It's about her seeing that her happiness was never meant to hinge on someone else's consistency. By the time she outgrows the silence, she no longer needs closure from you because she has found closure within herself. This process also changes the way she views the past. Memories that once felt sweet now seem like lessons. Patterns she once tolerated no longer meet her standards. Where she once felt disappointment, she now feels gratitude. Gratitude that the silence showed her the truth before she invested more of her time and energy. Outgrowing means she doesn't carry bitterness forward. She carries wisdom, and that wisdom shapes every choice she makes from then on. What is most striking about outgrowing rather than simply moving on is the permanence of it. Moving on can sometimes be temporary. People move on, only to circle back when the other person reappears. But outgrowing is different. Once she has stepped into this stronger, more self-assured version of herself, she cannot shrink back into who she was before. She cannot unknow her worth, she cannot lower her standards, and she cannot unsee the strength she has discovered. The difference is visible. When you see a woman who has truly outgrown a situation, you notice the way she carries herself. Her energy is lighter, her smile is freer, her boundaries are clearer. She isn't waiting for anyone to choose her because she has already chosen herself. And if someone from her past tries to return, she no longer feels the pull she once did. What once captivated her no longer matches the woman she has become. Outgrowing, not just moving on, is the ultimate transformation. It shows that silence doesn't just end a connection, it elevates her. It teaches her that she doesn't just survive without the contact, she thrives without it. And when she reaches that point, she realizes something profound. The silence that once hurt her was actually the space she needed to grow into the woman she was destined to be. Her choice, her power, is the final and perhaps the most defining stage of what happens when contact stops. At the start, silence may not feel like a choice for her. It feels imposed, as though something has been taken away. She didn't ask for the gap, she didn't invite the distance, and she didn't prepare for the sudden shift. But as the days pass and the reality of absence settles in, something changes. She realizes that while she cannot control your decision to go silent, she can absolutely control how she responds to it, and that realization is the birthplace of her power. When a woman decides not to chase, not to beg, not to cling to someone who withholds communication, she is making a choice. She is saying, I value myself more than I value your silence. That choice may begin quietly. It might look like her stopping the late night scroll through old messages, or resisting the urge to call just to hear your voice. It might look like her deciding not to explain herself anymore because explanations require a listener, and she refuses to speak into an empty void. Slowly but surely, she reclaims her agency and with it her strength. The beauty of this choice is that it flips the power dynamic. At first, silence can feel like control, like the one who withholds contact is the one who holds all the cards. But in truth, silence only has as much power as she allows it to have. Once she decides not to let it dictate her emotions, the control shifts. The silence no longer diminishes her, it defines you. It exposes your lack of consistency, your inability to communicate, or your unwillingness to invest. And in that exposure, she sees more clearly who you are and who she deserves. Her power grows in the space of that clarity. She understands that relationships are not built on absence, but on effort. She recognizes that real love communicates, real care shows up, and real presence does not hide behind silence. With this understanding, she makes the conscious choice to no longer give her energy to someone who cannot offer the basics of consistency and respect. That is not bitterness, it is wisdom. It is discernment, it is strength refined through disappointment. As her power grows, so does her freedom. She no longer feels bound by the what-ifs or haunted by the hope that you might return. Instead, she focuses on building her own joy, her own future, her own peace. She invests in people who mirror her effort, who celebrate her presence, and who value communication as much as she does. Her choice to walk away from silence opens the door to connections that actually speak to her worth. What makes this stage so transformative is that once she steps into her power, she doesn't step back. She doesn't lower her standards to accommodate silence. She doesn't shrink herself to fit into spaces where she was once ignored. Her choice redefines her path, and her power ensures that she never again entertains less than she deserves. The silence that once seemed like a loss becomes a turning point, marking the moment she chose herself above all else. And if one day you attempt to return, expecting to pick up where things left off, you'll find a different woman waiting. She won't be the one who tolerated uncertainty. She won't be the one who accepted excuses. She will be the one who chose herself. And because of that, your silence no longer has the same grip it once did. By then her choice has already become her liberation, and her power is untouchable. Her choice, her power, is the ultimate conclusion of silence. It is the moment she understands that your withdrawal was never the end of her story. It was simply the catalyst for her to step into her fullest, strongest, most unapologetic self. And once she does, nothing and no one can take that away from her. So remember this: when you stop contacting a woman, she doesn't lose, she chooses.